apple that changed science never hit Isaac Newton on the head. That detail is entirely fabricated. The cartoon Newton under a tree, apple striking his skull, gravity suddenly born, is a false image. It did not happen. No contemporary record supports it. No letter, no notebook, no diary entry from the 1660s mentions a piece of fruit making contact with the man's forehead. The story you absorbed from school books, from t-shirts, from pop culture memes is a carefully compressed fiction. So if the textbook version is wrong, what actually occurred in that plague-soaked summer of 1665 that led to the law of universal gravitation? The real case begins not with a young genius struck by falling fruit. It begins with an aging man, a memoir, and a quiet anecdote that did not involve anyone being hit. The first piece of physical evidence is a written page, manuscript MS 142, folio 15 recto, held in the Royal Society Library. The document is a memoir titled Memoirs of Sir Isaac Newton's Life *, composed by William Stukeley, an antiquary and clergyman who interviewed Newton at his home in Kensington in the spring of 1726. Stukeley wrote down what the elderly Sir Isaac told him. The manuscript page is not a contemporary snapshot from the 1660s. It is a recollection recorded 6 decades after the supposed event. Here is what Newton said, according to Stukeley's pen. He described being seated in his mother's garden at Woolsthorpe Manor when an apple dropped from a tree. The fruit fell to the ground. It did not strike him. It did not bruise his thought process into existence. It fell beside him. And in that moment, Newton began to contemplate why the moon did not fall. Why did the apple drop straight down while the moon remained suspended in the sky? The anecdote, as preserved by Stukeley, contains no head hit, no instant revelation, no shout of eureka. It was a question, not a theory. A seed, not a tree. This witness statement is the earliest known source for the apple story. It emerges in 1752, the year the memoir was published, more than a quarter century after Newton's death. No earlier account survives in Newton's own hand from the plague years. Not a single line in the Cambridge notebooks, the waste book, or the early mathematical papers mentions a falling apple as the trigger. The silence is conspicuous. If the event was as pivotal as the myth claims, Newton himself never wrote it down at the time. He only narrated it when he was an old man, curating his legacy, simplifying a complicated past. This shifts the nature of the evidence. The apple anecdote is not a lie, but it is not a straightforward fact either. It is a constructed memory, polished by age, offered to a biographer who would carry it forward. The physical record from the relevant period tells a different story. To understand that story, we have to go back to the year everyone now calls the Annus Mirabilis asterisk, the miracle year, 1665. Plague swept through England. Cambridge University closed its doors and sent its students home. 23-year-old Isaac Newton retreated to his family farm at Woolsthorpe in Lincolnshire. He stayed there for nearly 2 years. During that isolation, he laid the foundations for what would become calculus. He experimented with optics, and he began thinking about the forces that govern motion. The gravity idea was one thread among many. He did not spend those months sitting under a tree waiting for fruit to fall. He filled notebook after notebook with calculations, diagrams, and speculations. The Cambridge manuscript known as the Waste Book asterisk shows the young Newton wrestling with the concept of centrifugal force, attempting to reconcile the moon's orbit with the pull felt on Earth. There is messy mathematics, there are false starts, there is no tidy apple diagram. The evidence suggests that at some point, perhaps during a walk in the orchard, the sight of a dropping apple prompted him to ask, if the Earth's pull extends to the top of the tallest tree, might it reach all the way to the moon? That question was the kernel. But a question does not make a law. What the miracle year actually produced was a tentative comparison. Newton realized that if the same force that pulls an apple down also holds the moon in its path, then the force must weaken with distance. He began to suspect an inverse relationship, but to prove it, he needed accurate numbers. He needed the distance from the Earth to the Moon, the Earth's radius, and the rate at which the Moon falls away from a straight line every second. In the mid-1660s, those numbers were not reliably known. The best estimate for the Earth-Moon distance came from earlier astronomers, and it was significantly wrong. Newton plugged the available figure into his calculations. The force required to keep the Moon in orbit did not match the force predicted by an inverse square law using that distance. The numbers refused to align. He set the problem aside. That is not the behavior of a man who had completed a great discovery. It is the behavior of a man who hit a wall. The missing calculations sat in his manuscripts like an unsolved equation. Newton turned his attention to other investigations: optics, alchemy, biblical chronology. 17 years passed. The apple thought remained a loose end. The second major piece of evidence in this case arrives in the form of a visitor. August 1684. The astronomer Edmund Halley traveled from London to Cambridge to consult Newton about a question that was circulating among the scientific elite of the Royal Society. The question had been posed in a coffeehouse discussion between Halley, the architect Christopher Wren, and the experimenter Robert Hooke. They were all trying to determine the shape of a planet's orbit if the sun pulled on it with a force that weakened according to the inverse square of the distance. Wren had even offered a money prize for a correct mathematical proof. Nobody could produce one. Halley decided to ask Newton directly. He recorded the exchange later. He asked, "What curve would a planet follow under an inverse square force?" Newton answered without hesitation, "An ellipse." Halley, surprised, asked how he knew. Newton replied that he had calculated it years ago. He rummaged through his papers to locate the old proof, but could not find it. He promised to send it along. The visiting astronomer had just pulled a buried thread. Newton did not simply reproduce the lost calculation. He began to rework the entire problem from scratch, far more thoroughly than before. Within 3 months, he delivered a 9-page manuscript to Halley. Its title, De Motu Corporum in Gyrum Asterisk, on the motion of bodies in orbit. This document is a turning point in the case file. It contains the first rigorous mathematical demonstration that an inverse square force produces elliptical orbits conforming to Kepler's laws. It connects the falling apple to the orbiting moon with equations, not metaphor. Inside asterisk de motu asterisk, Newton included a famous diagram. A cannon sits atop a very tall mountain, firing projectiles horizontally at increasing speeds. With too little speed, the cannonball arcs and falls to the ground. With more speed, it travels farther before striking the Earth. With enough speed, the cannonball enters orbit, circling the planet, perpetually falling but never hitting the surface. The same force that drags the apple down can, if the horizontal motion is sufficient, carry a body around the Earth. The thought experiment was a direct physical expression of the question first kindled in the Woolsthorpe garden. The mathematical machinery was now in place. Newton had proven the inverse square law. But the proof immediately created a new tension. Because while Newton was assembling his demonstration, another member of the Royal Society claimed the idea as his own. Robert Hooke. He had written to Newton several years earlier, in 1679, suggesting that planetary orbits could be explained by an attractive force that diminishes with the square of the distance. Hooke's letter survives. It is Exhibit B in a bitter priority dispute. He challenged Newton to work out the mathematical path. Newton's reply at the time did not resolve the question. Now, in 1684, as Newton finally pinned the proof to paper, the shadow of that earlier correspondence hung over the pages. The core equation securing the case for universal gravitation was in Newton's hand, but the rival claim threatened the simple narrative of lone genius. The investigation had just grown more complicated. The complication had a name, Robert Hooke. He had written to Newton several years earlier, in 1679. The letter is preserved in the Royal Society archives. It is a single sheet, covered in Hooke's tight, hurried script. He proposed that planetary motion could be explained by a force that diminishes with the square of the distance from the sun. He even drew a small diagram, and he asked Newton to work out the shape of the resulting orbit. Hooke was not guessing in the dark. He had read Kepler. He understood that a force must bend a planet's path, but he could not provide the mathematics. He set the problem before Newton like a challenge. Newton's reply was polite but cautious. He admitted he had once considered a similar idea years earlier, but had set it aside. He did not send a solution. The letter is evidence that the concept of an inverse square force was already in the air. Hooke had named it. Wren had discussed it. Halley would soon raise it again. The idea of universal gravitation did not spring fully formed from a solitary garden in Woolsthorpe. It was a live question among the leading minds of the Royal Society. And that shifts the investigation. The apple thought, if it ever happened, was a private intuition. The proof, when it finally came, was built under the shadow of a rival claim. The case file now contains 2 items: the memoir page from Stukeley, written decades later, and this letter from Hooke, written in 1679. They point in different directions. One suggests a gentle, self-contained origin. The other reveals a field of contention. The question is no longer whether an apple fell. The question is whose idea it ultimately was. And how much credit does Hooke deserve? He had articulated the inverse square law in words. He had sketched the shape of a force that weakens with distance. But words and sketches are not equations. Newton provided the mathematical machinery that turned a suggestion into a law. He proved that an inverse square force yields elliptical orbits. He derived the motion of the moon. He calculated the tides. The *** manuscript, completed in late 1684, opened the door. But the full system was still to come. The evidence does not allow a simple verdict. Hooke's claim is genuine. He had the intuition, but intuition is not derivation. Newton's claim rests on the thousands of lines of mathematics that would become the Principia ***. The rival claim did not slow Newton down. It accelerated him. He would spend the next 3 years in a state of almost monastic obsession. The letters from the period paint a picture that is not romantic. Newton's servant later recalled that his master would forget to eat. He would sit for hours without moving, a single candle burning down. He wrote to astronomer John Flamsteed, demanding precise data on the orbits of Jupiter's moons. He needed numbers that would test his theory against reality. Flamsteed sent pages of observations. Newton found errors, recalculated, demanded more. The exchange was tense, but it was essential. A law of nature cannot rest on elegant algebra alone. It must match the sky. And there was Hooke, now demanding public credit. He insisted that any mention of the inverse square law in the upcoming work must name him. Newton's response was cold. He considered stripping the entire 3rd book of the Principia ***, the part that dealt with the system of the world, rather than share the stage. In a letter to Halley, he wrote that Hooke's claim was based on nothing more than a general supposition. He threatened to withdraw. The manuscript nearly died in a fit of wounded pride, but it did not. Newton pressed on. He organized the work into 3 books. Book 1 set out the laws of motion and the mathematics of central forces. Book 2 demolished the older vortex theory of Descartes with relentless logic. Book 3 applied the new mathematics to the real universe. It showed that the same force that pulls an apple to the ground holds the moon in its orbit. It explained the tides. It predicted the shape of the Earth, bulging at the equator. It traced the paths of comets. It unified heaven and earth in a single, mathematically expressed law. The Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica was published in July of 1687. The volume was printed in Latin, dense with geometry and fluxions. It was not written for a popular audience. It was written to convince the most skeptical minds in Europe. The initial print run was small, perhaps 300 copies. Halley himself paid for the publication out of his own pocket because the Royal Society had overextended its funds on a book about fish. The asterisk Principia asterisk landed like a verdict. It did not create gravity. It described it with a precision that had never been achieved before. The apple thought, the distant memory of Woolsthorpe, was now codified into a system that could predict planetary positions centuries into the future. The evidence of the completed work is undeniable. It is the book that made modern physics possible, but what of the man behind it? In the years after publication, Newton began to shape how the story would be told. He left the Royal Society, moved to London, took up a post at the Mint. He became a figure of public power, president of the Royal Society, a knight. And as he aged, he became the keeper of his own legend. In 1726, 1 year before his death, Newton sat with William Stukeley in a garden at Kensington. Stukeley had been collecting material for a biography. Newton recounted the apple story. He described sitting in the orchard at Woolsthorpe 60 years earlier, watching an apple fall. He said it made him wonder why the moon does not fall. He did not mention Hooke. He did not mention the 22 years of work that separated the speculation from the proof. He did not describe the data disputes, the abandoned drafts, the obsessive mathematics. He offered a single, clean image: an apple falls. A thought is born. That conversation became the foundation of the myth. Stukeley wrote it into his memoir, the very manuscript page we first examined. That page is not a contemporary record from 1665. It is a polished recollection, crafted by an elderly man who understood the power of a simple story. Newton was not lying. He was curating. He condensed a lifetime of struggle into an origin that could be told in a single sentence. The machinery of popularization did the rest. Voltaire heard the story from Newton's niece, Catherine Conduit, and published it in his asterisk letters on the English in 1733. Voltaire was a master of narrative. He saw that the anecdote contained the entire revolution, a falling fruit connecting the ordinary to the cosmic. But he never claimed the apple hit Newton on the head. That detail took another century to arrive. By the Victorian era, writers of children's books and popular science were looking for memorable images. One published in the 1800s added the falling on the head detail. Others followed. The cartoon was born. An apple strikes a dozing Newton. He wakes up. Gravity is invented. The image is so compact, so absurd, that it becomes unkillable. It survives into textbooks, into advertising, into the shared memory of the world. The evolution of the myth is itself a piece of evidence. It shows how a complex historical process gets compressed into a mental snapshot. The snapshot is not false. It captures a real connection, the unity of terrestrial and celestial physics. But it erases the time, the conflict, the collaboration. It replaces a human story with an icon. The memoir page, examined under this light, becomes a document of both testimony and myth-making. Newton's words are there in Stukeley's hand. They are the seed, but they were planted intentionally in a garden far removed from the plague year of 1665. They were meant to be remembered. What is the final verdict in this case? The apple myth is not a lie. It is a compression of a much larger truth into a single, elegant signal. The real Newton did not discover universal gravitation in one afternoon. He scratched at the edges of the idea as a young man, then spent 2 decades building the tools to prove it, under pressure from rivals, fighting for data, nearly abandoning the work multiple times. He completed the asterisk Principia asterisk in an obsessive 2-year sprint. And then, at the end of his life, he smoothed away the jagged edges of the process and handed the world a story it could carry. The truth is that discovery is not a moment. It is a slow, human trudge. It involves false starts, disputed credit, and grueling mathematics. The apple remains a perfect metaphor for the insight that unites heaven and earth. But behind that metaphor is a 20-year struggle that teaches us more about science than any cartoon ever could. The memoir page, held in the Royal Society, still exists. You can read it. It is the physical residue of an aging genius choosing his legacy. And it is also the artifact that proves the story we all learned as children is only the outermost surface of a far deeper investigation. The case is closed. The file remains on the table. And now you know what the apple actually meant.